Spanning the globe, it's World Affairs Roundup.
The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents World Affairs Roundup, a monthly edition of International Focus, providing opinion and analysis of global events, with John Katzka, a retired member of the U.S. Foreign Service, Ann Hamilton, political scientist at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service, and Robert Kraig, executive director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin and author of articles and books on American foreign policy. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now, here's your moderator, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Our Roundup regulars have placed their remaining NFL playoff bets with their bookmakers and are here once again to offer penetrating punditry as we take a look at Guests of the Imam. 10 U.S. sailors were briefly detained this week after straying into Iranian waters. Republican presidential hopefuls were quick to characterize the incident as evidence of perceived weakness by the U.S., while others said their quick and uneventful release was the product of warming U.S.-Iranian relations. Who's right? New Year's Eve hangover. Hundreds of sexual assaults on New Year's Eve in the German city of Cologne have prompted a full-throated chorus of "I told you so"s from right-wing German politicians. How big will the aftershocks be for embattled Chancellor Angela Merkel and other pro-immigrant leaders across the EU? Bottom of the barrel. Oil prices fell to a 12-year low this week. What's behind the plummeting prices? And is there a longer-term downside for consumers paying less at the pump? And straight talk. Voters in Taiwan went to the polls this week. While results were not available as of this recording, the smart money is on Ing-wen, a UK and US educated scientist who leads the Beijing skeptic Democratic Progressive Party. What's in her platform, and how might her victory alter the regional political landscape? Well, welcome back, everyone. Good to see you in the new year. John, maybe you could start by just recounting the events in the Gulf.
Well, I want to talk about these football pools that you're talking about. First of all, everyone's delighted that the people were released and they were unharmed and it was done quickly. I mean, the fact that it was done so quickly, I've got two observations about the process. The first one, it was done very quickly. A couple of years ago, this would not have been possible. The second thing is, because it was done quickly, it really takes the usefulness as a political tool out of it, not only for us in the United States with the presidential campaign going on, but also in Iran, which is a election for, is it the electors or the experts? The experts election coming up in February. And clearly the Revolutionary Guard Corps would love to be able to have used this, and they may even use the picture that you have on the screen right now.
So, Ann, what's changed? I mean, Secretary Kerry was quick to point out, imagine if this had happened a few years ago, how it might have played out. In fact, we had an incident several years ago in which some British Marines really met a similar fate, and it was a much more protracted process. So is it just the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, that it was the key element?
Well, I think what has happened is that during the nuclear deal, there was intense personal negotiation and some very deep personal relationships developed between the negotiators on each side. And a lot has been made of the fact that Secretary Kerry was able to leave the meeting he was in, go immediately and call the foreign minister with whom he had developed a strong relationship, talked on the phone with him multiple times over the course of the day, and managed to work together, the two of them, to get the release. I think it's a testament to the fact that personal diplomacy works. Personal relationships are important, and it's not so clear that our relationship with Iran per se as a state is so one we haven't even recognized them yet. We still don't actually have relations with them, formal relations, but the personal relationships do count, and that's a really important lesson.
So obviously, the administration is able to point to this and deliver a message very much like we just heard from Ann, and see, it works. Mm-hmm. Is there any legs on the other side of this, typically the narrative has been, well, they wouldn't have done it if they didn't think we were weak and they could toy with us in that way. I mean, do you think there's any political mileage for the people who don't like this deal?
Well, I mean, this happened the day of the State of the Union, which was very unusual, and there was all this back and forth. There was great hopes among the opposition that they could take advantage of this, and there were many intemperate statements made about this being a major international incident and meant we should cancel the Iran nuclear deal. It has not worked out that way at all. In fact, it's fairly embarrassing for those who were so far out front on the question. And I think in many ways it vindicates. Remember, Obama started out his administration wanting to deal with Iran, end the 35 years of complete isolation, not talking to them, and he's got a nuclear deal, and now he has enough diplomatic relationships, it's not formal relations, that you're able to diffuse this sort of conflict, which again, this shows, I mean, we have two former diplomats sitting at the table here, that diplomacy actually works, and that knowing people is helpful, even if your countries really aren't friends.
2 points. One, a slightly more cynical view of personal diplomacy. I think the fact that Iran is on the verge of receiving back a significant amount of treasure that we have been holding, as well as the reduction of the sanctions, had probably a stronger influence there than the warm personal relationship between Kerry and the foreign minister. I'll leave it there.
Well,
right, but if they hadn't been able to call each other and just do it,
you're absolutely right.
It's important,
it is useful. I didn't say it wasn't useful.
But does this tell us anything about sort of politics within Iran? I mean, certainly there are people who, as there are in this country, would like to see this deal just scuttled if at all possible, and this would have been a great opportunity for it. So the fact that the diplomacy prevailed and the sailors were on their way in less than 24 hours. Does that tell us anything about where the relative power is right now among hardliners and more moderate forces?
Well, let's be careful when we talk about Iranian politics, because it's all conservative. And we're talking about slightly more moderate conservatives as opposed to really hardline conservatives. I think that's very important for the viewers to understand, that we're not talking about our spread in terms of the electorate.
And I think what John said too about the fact that they're about to get this deal and have all this money released there's strong incentives for even we're calling the hardliners to. So
it shows that the slightly more moderate conservatives, as John called them, still have enough control so that this did not unwind the nuclear deal. So the same politics that made the nuclear deal possible made the release possible.
Well, and important is this the election of the experts, because Khomeini is aging, and that is the group that makes the selection. And so getting your people on that approved for that body is very important. I will also say that, yes, it worked right now, but we don't know what's going to happen after those funds are released and the sanctions are lowered in terms of where the relationship goes.
Or, since the Iranians called those the harsh, hawkish voices that day in Congress troublemakers, if the troublemakers take power, then all bets are off too.
Are those the troublemakers here or over there?
I meant here.
Well, let's move on to a different location. And among the year-end holiday makers and merriment was some very unfortunate activity in the German city of Cologne. And tell us exactly what happened and what the fallout has been.
Well, there were festivities going on near the train station in Cologne, and there are reports that organized groups of what they're saying were mostly immigrants and largely refugees from what they were reported North African and Arab origin, started surrounding women and assaulting them. There are allegations of at least 2 rapes. And there have been 553 arrests that have been made. This went on from, according to the police reports, something like 11:30 at night till 2 or 3 in the morning. But the the witnesses are saying that no, the first assault actually happened around 7 at night. So there's some disparity between what witnesses are saying and the police report. So there's confusion about the official story, and then there's all sorts of fallout about the fact that Angela Merkel's refugee acceptance of refugees has been so liberal. They accepted more than 1 million last year, and now you have these assaults on New Year's Eve.
Well, and there's really allegations that being the case and that story prompting the inevitable blowback, that there's been somewhat of a cover-up, hasn't there? I mean, there's been a real reluctance to actually acknowledge that it happened.
The whole scenario is very bizarre. You had apparently a lot of drunk young men, from what the reports are, in large numbers, and Cologne was the biggest area. It wasn't the only area.
Yeah, there were other cities.
Anything happened. The police response was unexplainably slow and unexplainably small in terms of the scale of what was going on, which obviously escalated. Once you have a mob like this, it needs to be dealt with very directly. And then the reaction has been, horrendous as far as the far right in Germany. And you have 2 fairly mainline magazines with almost Jim Crow-like covers concerned with the racial implications of white women being defiled by darker men. And so something you would have seen in slavery or the Jim Crow era. And so as unexplainable, and there's potentially a cover-up because it seems that at least the case may be made that the policy of the government was to pretend this wasn't happening because of the politics of it, rather than address it directly. And everyone knows with any kind of scandal, immediate disclosure of everything is much better from a crisis management standpoint. Otherwise, the cover-up is often as bad or even worse than the original problem.
So we've seen a walking back of that liberal policy already by the Merkel government. Is that just implicitly a recognition that, yes, indeed, you were right?
Since I have been on other programs saying before that the cultural dimensions of this migration is not being examined, yes, I think it is that they were right. No one's thinking, it's not only the question of 1.1 million people who have been brought in as refugees into Germany, it's the concentration of these people into small areas, and therefore there's no assimilation occurring in this process. So the reaction is on the part of the larger German people is I think understandable.
They don't have the social service infrastructure for real assimilation.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So have we reached a tipping point then in German society where the sort of xenophobia that we've seen in other parts of Europe may be pushed more to the mainstream in what was the most welcoming of the countries?
I think that, well, first of all, there are a lot of demonstrations going on. There are groups organizing. There's a new party called Alternative for Germany. Actually, I don't know how old it is, but it seems to be gaining a lot of strength of late. There's a group that's called Pegida, the Patriotic Europeans for the de-Islamization of the, I can't remember exactly what it means, but against anti-Islam group, and they're very, very strong. But I think that this is also forcing a lot of discussions within Germany, a much more forceful, desire to look at what's going on head on. That really look at the cultural dimensions of this and what it means, so they're having much deeper discussions now. I think there is a potential for there to be a much stronger backlash and for there to be a really big change in German politics as a result.
There was a very curious and interesting connection between the women's organizations in Germany and with Pegida, which are really on opposite ends of the spectrum. But this is where I think Merkel is most vulnerable, is because it was, if this had just been acts of violence towards Germans in general, that wouldn't be near the problem it is because it was against women.
Well, we'll have to leave it at that. We will be moving on to another part of the world, but first we'll take a short break. See you shortly.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back. We're talking, as always, with John Katzka and Hamilton and Robert Kraig. Well, now let's talk about a happier subject. When you go
Depends upon where you live.
Well, when you're at the pump filling up your late model luxury sedan, John, you're finding that prices have actually dropped by 72% in the last 18 months.
It's good to know that Chevys are luxury models.
So what's driving that?
Well, Saudi Arabia started this whole thing with a decision to increase significantly the amount of production that it was going on, and the Emirate partners agreed to it. It's my understanding that the goal was twofold. One was to punish Iran and drop the prices and therefore make bigger Iran in the process. The second was the U.S. and Canadian shale producers who were beginning to become much more available at the pump in terms of their resources, but also against certain others like Russia in the process. So there was a whole number of targets for this one.
So, analysts are saying basically OPEC has ceased to act like a cartel, that members are sort of pumping at will and just trying to get as much market share as they can. So, what does that mean? I mean, we're seeing forecasts of long-term very low oil prices to a place like Russia, for example.
Well, Russia is planning on prices being low for a very long time and trying to do what it can to keep its market share. However, its economy is in deep trouble. It's losing. It's got a 4% GDP loss over last year. Some people say 5%. Incomes are down. There are a lot of huge problems exacerbated by sanctions, but also by the very low oil and gas prices. And the economy, 66% of its exports are oil and gas. So it's trying to maintain its position vis-a-vis, especially Saudi Arabia. There's discussion of Saudi Arabia trying to get Russia to join OPEC. I don't quite know what that would do at this point because they're not working together as a cartel should. It's hard to say. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, it's one of those. You read, some people are saying this is going to be over by July. We're going to start seeing oil prices go up. Others are saying no, it's going to be for another 7 years. People have been wrong in the past, so it's a very volatile situation.
So for the consumer, of course, at the pump, this seems like very good news. Is there a downside domestically in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, it actually is turning around. At first, it was producing more consumer consumption and therefore propping up the stock market. Now they're getting concerned about the energy industry, and so the stock market's going the other way. There's obviously short-term benefit to individual consumers having to spend less, but you are undermining alternative energies here, and therefore, and we're at the same time talking about needing to take on global warming. When you have this unnatural, and this is what you have with the commodity decline in oil, then it makes everything else, unprofitable. So it hurts solar, it hurts wind. Now there's this trade-off with shale oil. Now that's stuff that needs to stay in the ground from a global warming perspective, so undermining that actually is not as bad from a global warming standpoint. But this is all another twist in our dependence upon petroleum and on fossil fuels, and it's sort of the whole oil shock of 1973 in reverse, with a great decline impacting the whole world economy rather than the increase caused by the creation of OPEC and the initial cartel.
Well, when you look around the world, and particularly in the producer nations, there's obviously a huge economic impact of all of this. At what point does it have a political impact?
Well, I think it's already having that. Russia and Saudi Arabia are both talking about privatizing certain of their oil interests to be, in the case of Saudi Arabia, to cover their budget deficit issues, and probably the same thing would apply to Russia. So in that sense, I think that's how they are dealing with it politically.
Yeah, I mean, the one estimate says the Russian budget could be balanced at $82 a barrel, and it's currently trading at $30. So,
well, and in fact, $29.96 is the lowest it's gone. I think that there's another issue here, and this is broader and longer, and we don't know when it's going to apply. But people are getting used to this, and there are decisions being made on the basis of what we know right now that could have serious economic and political ramifications, not only for producers but for consumers as well.
Well, I think one thing that was interesting, the little dust-up between Iran and Saudi Arabia around the execution of the Shia cleric, I think a few years ago would have created a huge spike in the price of oil, and there was barely a blip.
Right.
So, we're in uncharted territory.
Well, the economic downturn in the world, especially in China, is also a major contributor to this.
Well, let's go straight to the Straits from here, and...
No curves?
By the time our audience is watching this, we will know the results of the Taiwanese election. But if polls are anywhere close to being correct, the DPP, the more skeptical party with regard to Beijing, will have elected its first female president. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, who she is.
Well, she's a lawyer. She's 59 years old. She's worked in the government of the previous pro-independence government, which was 2000 to 2008, in a couple of capacities. She's negotiated trade deals, and she's also was a minister in the area of mainland affairs. So she negotiated with the PRC on some difficult issues related to relations between some Taiwanese islands and the mainland, Fujian province. She's considered a very diplomatic person, somebody who's quite sophisticated, much less aggressive and and more compromising than her predecessor, the previous DPP leader from 2000 to 2008. But she is refusing to endorse the 1992 consensus, which recognizes one China but agrees not to have to agree on what that means. She's being a little bit cagey. She talks about respecting the status quo. So in terms of how this will all play out with Chinese relations, there's a lot of uncertainty.
Well, and let's look at the current regime in Beijing. I mean, is this a leadership right now on the mainland that's likely to brook any rumblings of sovereignty?
There's a lot of concern about that. And as far as the coalition here, unlike in 1992, most Taiwanese now see themselves as Taiwanese and not Chinese, especially the young. And there's been such a huge increase in the cost of living without an increase in the number of good jobs, particularly for young people, that kind of unrest has helped spark this election. And furthermore, there's an idea that the tightening with China and the coalescing, which is supposed to have economic benefits, has helped an elite, helped some wealthy people, not help the average person have mobility. And so there is in this, which is more problematic for the relationship, a turning away from a closer ties with China as a solution to a future of Taiwan, and it's something China may not want to brook. So there's a lot of concern about how China will react.
It brings another player into the South China Sea issues, where energy is involved, where sovereignty is involved. China's expanding its interests. We are now talking to the Philippines about putting troops back into the Philippines. Other countries in the area are looking to us to be an offset to this. Our advice so far to the Taiwanese is, let's keep this under control.
Right, because let's talk a little bit about what the U.S. relationship formally and informally with Taiwan is.
Well, we don't have formal relations with Taiwan, but they are an ally of ours, and we do have arms agreements with them. We have said we will support them, we'll arm them militarily. Whenever there's saber rattling between the PRC and Taiwan, we show strength in the area militarily. So We really want both sides to keep keep the tensions down, because we do not. There's also a 2005 law in China which commits them to responding militarily to any declaration, the PRC, to respond militarily to any declaration of independence. So it could be a very tense situation for the United States.
When we recognize China and we continue the relationship with Taiwan, any officer serving at our interests office there had to resign from the Foreign Service for that period of time, and then were brought back in after they finished their tour there.
So, what do you think? I mean, is it likely to heat up, or is this, as you said, Anne, she's much more temperate?
It has to do with her diplomacy, right? How she's going to play it, because she has built a larger electorate by being more vague, and it's a question of exactly how much provocation China will accept, right? China has a lot of other problems and has an economic downturn, so perhaps cooler heads will prevail here. But
on the other hand, that's always an opportunity to look for boogeymen abroad. Right. When things are bad at home.
Which we've seen in Russia, where Putin is still popular despite the economy because of nationalism.
And the nationalist argument.
Well, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you. Good to see you back here again. And our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.